Marty, welcome to the Z Learning Podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
My pleasure. Now, before we get into the questions, I would love if you would just share with my audience a little bit about who you are, who is Marty Katz, your background, and your expertise in marketing.
Well, thanks, of course. So I'm a marketing consultant. I specialize in brand messaging. And brand messaging is the strategy that is used for the development of communications outreach efforts. It's essentially the blueprint or the architecture for communications. Identifies what a company is. Its brand identity is who are you, what problem do you solve, and for whom. That's what a brand message is.
And who are you, Marty Katz? I
So,
know. Yeah.
so good. So I'm a person who writes these messages, who writes the strategy, who creates the blueprints, and then those blueprints then are used by content people like yourself to actually develop the outreach efforts. So I design, you build. I'm the designer of the communication. Someone else writes the copy, does the videos or any visuals. That's the content. And finally, the third piece is the outreach efforts, the digital marketing, which follows, all of which is based on identifying the audience and the problem you solve for them in a way that provides a solution they can't find elsewhere.
And would it be accurate to describe you as a marketing strategist? You build that foundational piece.
Yes, I'm the architect and the foundational person who creates the basis upon which all the marketing efforts take place.
Right. Yes. And having a solid brand architecture and a persona, company persona is very important. It really shapes everything else you're doing in terms of your tactics and other communications and a lot of the stuff that I do. And the more that people have that kind of foundation, the easier and better and more effective I think people will be. Maybe before we go into talking about branding and marketing and all that, I just love to know, share with my listeners a little bit. I know we talked before just about your background in the advertising world. I know that you were a little after the Mad Men era, but you did work in like you did some exciting work, I know, in New York at advertising agencies. Would love to share with my listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, I definitely missed the Mad Men era. Nonetheless, I did have private jets that ferried me around the country from time to time to visit clients, and platters, all kinds of goodies were served. For sure, I definitely experienced that. The limos to pick me up. So my background is in advertising agency account management work. I've also worked on the client side extensively, my background includes packaged goods, retail, and entertainment, also financial services. That's primarily what my background is. Um, and so I have a lot of experience in all aspects of marketing, advertising, public relations, promotion, and branding. And I've now settled on branding as my own specialty area. And I personally work with leaders of small to mid-sized companies who are responsible for growth. The problem that they're having is that they're not getting the sales that they want. They're not connecting with their target audience. And the reason is that their message is not clear or memorable. And this leaves them frustrated and confused about how to plan for the future. So I've developed a 12-step program, if you pardon the expression, that allows marketers to identify the problem that they solve and for whom, and so they can find a connection with their audience to produce interest in or awareness of, engagement with, which is back and forth, and sales leads. That's what I do.
I love that. That is well branded,
Thank you.
which I'd expect nothing less. Do people, when they come to your 12-step program, do they start with, "Hi, my name is, and I'm addicted to not being memorable," or something like that?
Well, it's not it's not quite that serious, but a lot of my clients, when they come to me, are addicted to talking about process. They like to talk about, what they do and how they do it, as opposed to what problem they solve and talking about the prospect. So one of the three rules of marketing. The first rule of marketing is nobody cares about you. They don't. They have their own problem.
Yeah.
The second rule is they will only remember the problem that you solve, and the problem that you solve has to be resonant with them. And the third is if you tell them about your credentials and your processes, they won't do the work to figure it out. So people come to me doing that, and when they leave me, they don't do that any longer.
Love it. Yeah. And I would say, you've heard this said, of course, people don't pay for what you do, they pay for results. And I think a lot of people get lost. I call it getting lost in your own story
True.
rather than really creating an engaging, compelling story for others. People get lost in like you said, process or features. They don't do enough emphasis communicating the benefits that come from using their product or service. And I think and not only talking about the benefits rather than the features, but communicating those benefits in a way that I think touches people on a personal and emotional level. That's where you
That's,
really.
that, that's absolutely correct. People have to identify it. See, features and benefits are actually a subset or downstream from the initial piece. A lot of people like to talk about that, features and benefits, but they only become interesting after you've been able to engage with your target audience on a visceral level. So they'll say, oh, this organization really gets me on an emotional level. They see what the problems is that I have. And there's a distinction between problems and pain. Pain is sales. Like right now, you need to have a solution. As an example, if you have a problem in your relationship, the problem is you have the problem with the relationship. That's the problem. The pain is I need to get a divorce lawyer. So that's the distinction that exists. So you need to identify the problem that you solve before you talk about the pain that you're going to resolve for them. And so these are very important distinctions because they resonate, as you correctly pointed out, on an emotional level. So people can say, this person really understands what I'm going through right now.
Awesome. Beautifully said. Absolutely correct. So, one thing, maybe first before we get into talking about, I know we were gonna speak about refresh and rebranding. What about just coming up with the brand? I mean, part of it is obviously creative, part of it is addressing certain problems. How can people be more strategic? Just a few tips, if you can. How can people be more strategic when they're coming up with their brand identity? Should they do some psychedelics? Should they imagine what animal their company would be if it was an animal? Like, what are a few foundational pieces people could take away?
Well, I'm not authorized to talk about psychedelics. I could do that, but I'm going to pass on that particular one. Actually, there are no tips and tricks. It doesn't exist. What it requires is really identifying what is the problem that you solve. And I've said this earlier, but because people love to talk about, I sell this. My product does this, but you have to really identify, take yourself out of the conversation because the corollary to the rules of marketing I just mentioned is the two rules of communication. The first rule of communication is it's not about you. And the second rule of communication is it's never about you. So you have to step aside with all your experience, all your credentials, all of your thoughts and ego and thought leadership and all that stuff, and just focus on your target and what is it that they need. And this is not a sales dialogue, by the way. It's the distinction because if you're in front of somebody in a sales conversation, you can be very specific about what's going on with them. If I have as a target audience lawyers, I have to really understand what lawyers are looking for. The problem is that they have as a group, because a brand conversation stands alone from and separate from any one-on-one conversation. It's what you do online. What is your website? What are your collateral materials? What kind of events that you have? What is your public relations? All these kinds of activities are separate and apart from sales. So you have to be sure that what you say is something that is at once very targeted, but not to a specific like a sales conversation would entail.
Yeah, and I think that's the major misstep of a lot of companies. I think they want to jump to the sales conversation, which is understandable. You got to make payroll, you got to, increase your revenue, and I mean that's what it's about. But at the end of the day, I think people can really get a lot more out of investing their time and building their brand. And if they build that brand and a strong identity, I think it pays dividends off in the long term. But a lot of people have no clue to do that, even if they think in theory they want to do that. Maybe I don't know if this is a weird question, but why do you think so many companies are resistant, especially if they're a little bit, not a big brand, but smaller companies? Why are they so resistant to branding? Or why are they so clueless about it?
Well, it's because they think it's all about sales. Because if you're a small company, you typically don't have in your own mind, you don't have the bandwidth to create a brand. A brand is what opens the dialogue and the sales closes it. And so smaller companies they only want to close. That's what it's all about closing. That's the mindset about it. We got to close right away. But it's much shrewder, in my opinion, to have a dialogue with people so that you can, by the time you have the sales conversation, you don't have to educate them that much about your company. The purpose of a brand is to educate or inform your target audience about why they should do business with you, what makes you special and different, and what the problem is that you solve, and what the outcome would be. So that's all a process that can happen to prepare for a sales dialogue. So the sales actually are more effective and efficient and more rapid. So that's the process. So to answer your question, smaller firms typically they get nervous in the service. I got to sell right away. But when you wind up spinning your wheels, as opposed to having a strategy and a plan and some tactics so that they all work synergistically with each other.
Absolutely. And I think that, one confusing factor, especially for, marketers in the digital age, was that I think Jeff Bezos once said something like, Bezos, I don't know. He said that your brand is what your customers say about you when you're not in the room.
Right.
Right. And sales, you have to have a good presentation, a good pitch, but you already have their ear, you have the meeting. Branding, I think, is what gets people to even take notice and pay attention to you in the first place. And I think if you've done it right, if you've worked with someone like Marty Katz, then they're already sold before you get in the room to do your pitch. Now, the maybe problem slash opportunity is, I think today with social media and SEO, everything that we have now, I think that the branding and the sale has gotten a little meshed and mishmashed, in that people are kind of doing both at the same time. They're maybe not always understanding the boundaries between the two, because you're trying to simultaneously get attention, but also you're trying to get clicks, sale, subscriptions, whatever it is. Do you have any tips for how people can really segment in their mind and sort of know, okay, what I'm doing when they're looking at their marketing strategy, this fits into branding and this is more further down the funnel? Like, how can people be more strategic?
Absolutely. It's very simple. It's called a marketing plan. The marketing plan identifies the steps by which an organization creates awareness of, interest in, and engagement that lead to sales. And so you're quite right. People sort of congeal all of these things. They think that a logo is a brand. They think that that your website can be rebranded. There's no such thing. It can be redesigned. It doesn't get rebranded. There's a kind of a mishmash, you're quite right, that goes on there. But the solution is to have a plan to say, here are the things that we're going to do in terms of our own marketing. We're going to have these events online and off, much like you're having this podcast. Or what are the activities that will engage people, not so much to sell them, but to inform them about your presence and why they should do business with you and what makes you special and different and how you solve their problems. As opposed to here's the contract, we're ready to sign. I can get you these kind of clicks right away if you sign up with me. So otherwise, it's a burnout for people who are constantly selling without having the backup, having the support. Successful salespeople want to have significant marketing and branding support, because they know that if they have that, as you just pointed out, when they're in front of a prospect, they can close much more quickly and at a higher price because there's value attached. Oh, I've heard about this company. I read about them. I saw them. So that you create a value. So you're not coming in cold to people by saying, I'm ready to sell, and here's my website, and here's a PDF, and let's go.
Oh, well said. And that's, full disclosure to my listeners out there. What do you think I'm doing this podcast for? My help. This is branding. No, but I hope a lot of people get value out of it, even if they're not customer or clients. But I think that a lot of people are a bit confused. They say I want to do and also just want to address one other point you said about sales who want branders. So I think those are real good effective salespeople know that it's that the marketing department are their friends. Marketing and sales don't have to be rivals. I think when it's done poorly, marketing is too disconnected from the customers and the end users, and they're thinking too much maybe in creative or high level, and salespeople are too much about close and they're not focused on the brand identity. I think when they work together, it really works like a charm because the marketing people know how to build a great brand and they understand and are empathetic to the end user and the sales process. And the sales people, if it's B2B, sometimes, or if it's not a sales department, sometimes it's just the people doing the e-commerce site or the people in charge of the UX UI, however the sales process works, are empowered and I think feel their job a lot easier. So maybe walk us through a common phenomenon I've noticed, and I'm sure you have as well, where if someone comes to you and they say, I want to do a rebrand, I got to do a rebrand. And then you talk with them and it turns out they just really want a new website. They just want to redo their website or their logo. What and really, I think I would call that I guess, a brand refresh. Maybe you could explain to my listeners, viewers, what's the difference between, or what is a rebrand exactly, and how does it differ from a brand refresh?
Yeah, a rebrand is a really rather extreme form of changing your identity. So so the reason that a company would rebrand themselves, that means that they're taking on a new identity. It's only for really extreme cases. The CEO has some kind of scandal. Your financials are in the toilet. You're just going through a bankruptcy. There's some major international scandal that impacts your business. That's when you get into a rebrand. It means you're really changing everything about what you do. So that's rare.
Is that like
Refresh.
Wachovia becoming Wells Fargo in 2008?
Exactly. Like I work, as you see, at WeWork, and WeWork may be in a position where they want to rebrand themselves because they're in bankruptcy, And I don't want to say anything negative about them, but I mean that's a kind of an example of an organization that could want to rebrand themselves. They don't have to, but that's or like Volkswagen had that scandal a number of years ago about safety. I mean, they're also a good example of a company which want to rebrand. That means you come up with a new name, with a new identity of what you do, the products and services that you sell. There's a real difference. You're still in the car business, but you're doing something that's very different. Refresh is much more common. Refresh is something that companies should do regularly, which means is let's take a look at the problem that we solve and for whom, and has something changed over the past couple of years. For instance, are our customers getting older? We want to appear younger, or are we missing out a market, an ethnic market? Are we missing out on an overseas market? So then you can actually refresh your brand so that you have a different identity for a market spur. That would be very effective for a refresh. Or maybe your communications is passe, and your salespeople are complaining. People are just not getting this. I'm not connecting the way I used to. So you can have a brand refresh to be more modern, more contemporary, even within the same marketplace. But that's a refresh, and that's much more common. And that's something that companies should really be doing regularly because that will give them a competitive edge they would not have otherwise.
For sure, yeah. Like on the refresh side, which is more common, sometimes it's as simple as the basic level branding, like, oh, our logo or our website looks dated, or
Well,
maybe
that's not branding. That's brand expression. So a
uh-huh.
brand expression is the way that a brand is expressed. That's content. So
Mhm.
that's not a refresh. That is a design thing because you can
Mhm.
have exactly the same brand strategy, same brand identity, but the way you express it is more contemporary. So that's not what this is. A refresh is that we're taking a different view of our company and our deliverables and want to identify another way that's more contemporary and is more targeted versus what we did, say, 3 or 4 years ago. And so, and then after that is identified, then you can go to the idea about a new logo if you want, or a redesigned website. That's all brand expression. There's a distinction between brand identity, which is what I'm responsible for, and the brand expression, which is what you're responsible for.
And thank you for making that distinction, because people use a lot of these terms so loosely, even marketers.
I do.
And often I'm forced to speak colloquially when I'm talking with people about these things. Unless they come out of Marty Katz Academy, I much look forward to working with, of course, with more clients who have gotten an education from you. And thank you for coming on the show and really clearly and articulately explaining the differences between these terms and what they actually mean. Marty, where can people learn more about you and the services that you offer?
Well, I know you're going to be sending out a note to everybody. So my company is Connectors 360, and my web address is connectors360.com. You can also contact me via email, marty@connectors360.com. Those are the two best ways. You can look for me on LinkedIn. There's a profile of me there. That should do it.
Awesome. All right. Well, everyone, also look in the show notes. I will link all that information there. You'll be able to find it, and you'll be able to connect with Marty. Marty, thank you so much for coming on the Z Learning Podcast. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for the time today. I appreciate it.